Just want to say as well, thank you guys for your encouragement and support and stuff through this. This isn't easy for me. This is very much out of my comfort zone. But I've so enjoyed doing this last year and a bit, couple years, I guess. And your enthusiasm and your commitment to come, it's very encouraging to me. There's a lot of things you could be doing on a Wednesday night other than coming here. I'm blessed by you guys as well. So I just wanted to thank
we're
you.
the blessed ones.
Thank you.
Yes, we get to receive it.
Well,
That's right.
got it for you.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, another thank you tonight. This is the final word tonight from Job's three friends. We're going to hear from Bildad next. He keeps it short. And I think that might reflect the fact that he's kind of running out of steam as well. We're going to notice that Zophar doesn't come back for a third round. Seemingly, there's some debate about that. We'll get to that when I get to chapter 27. But Zophar apparently has given up. Bildad keeps it short, and basically everything he says now is something he's already said before. So he keeps it short, thankfully. Like his name would imply, short, Shuhite. Then Bildad the Shuhite answered him and said, this is chapter 25, dominion and fear belong to him. He makes peace in his high places. Is there any number to his armies? Upon whom does his light not rise? So Bildad's not saying anything that anybody would disagree with. Job and the three friends already agree on this, right? They express their agreement on the greatness of God. That's how Bildad opens this. But I guess Bildad is, on the next verse, basically is saying it's impossible. God is an impossible foe for Job, is what he's getting at. He's warning Job. It's like, don't take God on, right? You're not going to win. You just need to surrender to God, and things will be well again. Verse 4, he says, how then can a man be righteous before God? Or how can he be pure who was born of a woman? If that sounds familiar, that's the exact words Job used back in chapter 9. So Bildad's arguing with Job using Job's own argument. Job said the same thing. How can a man be righteous before God? That was his question. Job thought, if I'm not righteous, how can a man be righteous? And Bildad's kind of saying the same thing, but it kind of goes to show, I guess, how out of touch Bildad is. He's just spewing out words at this point, not realizing, I think, that is making Job's argument for him. It's like I said before, there's two types of people in the world: those who have something to say and those who have to say something. And I think Job's three friends are in the latter group there. Verse 5, even if the moon does not shine and the stars are not pure in his sight, how much less man who is a maggot and a son of man who is a worm? So Bildad suggesting that even some of the most glorious parts of creation, right, the moon and the sun, fall short of the glory of the Creator. He says, if the moon and the sun, or the moon and the stars, can't reflect the glory of God, then what chance does a man have to do that? And that's Bildad's final argument. He didn't really attack Job. He was posing some of the questions that Job had already asked. I don't know if he just felt that they have established Job's guilt adequately, so he went easy on him this time. Like I said, there wasn't really a quarrel with Job at this point. He was just commenting on the glory of God and the humility of man. So now Job responds again, and this chapter begins a long discourse now from Job. He speaks for the next 6 chapters. So he's going to answer Bildad first in chapter 26, and then he goes on a long speech about wisdom in general, and then he has his final defense in chapter 31. So he answers the speech of Bildad. He speaks on wisdom and his final defense. So verse 1 of chapter 26, Job is challenging Bildad and his friends in general. It says, "But Job answered and said, How have you helped him who is without power? How have you saved the arm that has no strength?" Obviously, everything that's happened here now has struck a nerve with Job, right? And he can't restrain himself. Considering all the wisdom that his friends had, wisdom, quote unquote, that his friends had, and is wondering where the help and the strength was in all of that. He wasn't feeling it, obviously. And is wondering, who else have you helped? I would say that the friends were so concerned with being right that they kind of forgot their purpose of coming, which was to bring comfort and help with Job, but they just wanted to be right. I'm sure we've all had people like that. You get into a debate or an argument or something, even when they know they're wrong, they don't drop an argument. They just need to be right.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I think that's probably something that's happened here as well. Verse 3, "How have you counseled one who has no wisdom? And how have you declared sound advice to many? To whom have you uttered words, and whose spirit came from you?" So Job is making a broad statement, basically to include anyone else other than himself, who has he helped as well. And he says something that, if you remember in the first speech of Eliphaz in chapter 4, remember he had this mysterious vision of the spirit came to him in the night, and this spirit revealed to him principles of certain things. Remember that? That spirit, Eliphaz said, "Can a mortal be more righteous than God?" That was the comment from this vision that he had. And Job wanted to know from Bildad now. He says, "Whose spirit came from you?" He's throwing it back at them. NIV puts it, "Whose spirit spoke from your mouth?" So he's, I don't know if he's rubbing it into Eliphaz there or if he's really questioning Bildad. And now Job starts to speak about the greatness of God. And verse 5 says, "The dead tremble, those under the waters and those inhabiting them. Sheol is naked before him, and destruction has no covering." That's interesting. I looked at that and I wondered what that meant. These watery dead. It says, "The dead tremble under the waters and those who inhabit them. Sheol is naked before him." Almost connecting with Sheol, with the waters and where the dead reside. There's a lot of ideas about that, but rather than getting into all of that, I think most people just regard it as kind of a poetic description of the darkness and the gloom and the misery and the uncertainty of the world beyond. Regardless, Job's point is simple. He says, no place is hidden from God, even the depths, even the darkness, even the grave, Sheol. Everything is exposed before God, he says, even the realm of the dead and the depths of the sea. He stretches out the north over empty space, and he hangs the earth on nothing. That's remarkable insight from Job. When you think about it, like, this is an ancient guy, and they had ancient ideas, no doubt. We think about all the ancient cultures, and not even that long ago, but certainly, say, thousands of years ago, they had all kinds of ideas about the earth and where we lived and whatever, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of ancient cultures that believe we're riding on the back of a turtle. This is just the shell of a turtle we're riding on. Of course, the Greeks, who are enlightened and smart and wise people, they had a picture of Atlas, a god, holding up the earth on his back, right? Some cultures said the earth was on the back of elephants. We're riding on the back of elephants. So there's all kinds of quaint ideas, we would say now, but I mean, that was their belief back then. They couldn't comprehend that the earth is just hanging in space on nothing. But here's Job, 4,000 years ago, has that insight. And that's interesting, because as we go through this, especially when we get to chapter 38, God speaks, we're going to see some profound insight into the natural world that you have to wonder where they got it from, other than divine inspiration. Mm-hmm. There's probably 15 or 20 comments, scientific discoveries, let's say, that are foreshadowed in the book of Job. And we'll go through those as we get up towards the end there when God speaks. There's more spoken about creation in Job than there is in Genesis. So there's a lot to unpack there. But this is the first one that really struck me, right? That the earth hangs on nothing. And again, that's just a profound insight from an ancient and unknowing person, I guess. He binds up the water in his thick clouds, and yet the clouds are not broken under it. He covers the face of his throne, and he spreads his cloud over it. He drew a circular horizon on the face of the waters, at the boundary of light and darkness. That's another one. Job knew that the horizon wasn't straight, but it was circular. It had a curvature to it. We don't even know that by looking at it or observing it. But he said God drew a circular horizon on the face of the waters. That's echoed in Isaiah as well. I don't have the passage there, but Isaiah even says something similar to that the earth is round. Not just round, but spherical is the idea. So again, some pretty amazing insights. And these are discoveries that, we would say only in the last few hundred years we've been able to confirm that, right, with our technology and that sort of thing. But anyhow, Job understood the principle of the curvature of the earth, the curvature of the nature of the curved horizon. So the fact that God can spread out the heavens over empty space, hang the earth on nothing, fill the clouds with water and they don't burst, should impress us, I think, that Job was given these insights. And honestly, when you read through this, you don't see anything that you'd say, oh, okay, well, you can dismiss that. He didn't really know what he was talking about. Everything is supported by our science and our discoveries and our understandings. And you think, a few hundred years ago, they would maybe read Job and they would think, oh, ancient guys, what would they know? And it turns out that, in fact, it is all supported by truth and scientific fact now that we know.
I remember listening to some of Chuck Missler's first. He has a course that you can take through
Koinonia
House. And I mean, he's very intellectual. He's I didn't understand all of the whole science and all that kind of stuff. And listening to him describe about the earth and stars and the moon and the sun. I mean, he literally says that God is literally holding all of our matter together. And at any point, he could just go like that.
Well,
and we disappear. That's
in Colossians. There's a verse in Colossians that says, I can't recall it from memory, but I can't even recall the scripture, the passage, but basically that the Lord holds everything together. Everything consists, and the Lord is holding it together. And one of these days, we know He's just going to let go. There's going to come a time when the earth and the heavens, as we know it, will cease to exist. We get to see the new heavens and the new earth, but at some point,
it's just
the one that holds matter together is going to let go.
It's just the thought, right? Because you can't comprehend that when you sit there and you actually think about it and you go, like, God is holding this all together. He's holding everything that makes up this table together. Everything that makes me, everything that makes you. Yeah. He's holding it all together. And he could just, and it just all disappears.
Well,
and it's just something. I was listening to Dr. Jeremiah tonight, and he was saying the exact same thing about how God's holding everything together. And I was like, and so you guys start to go, wow.
Well, it's true.
Double meal here.
Yeah. I don't mean to go too far on a tangent because we got a lot of ground to cover, but you think about the atom.
Yeah.
Right? You got your proton, electron, your nucleus, whatever. Mm-hmm. And we're talking something so infinitely small, these components of an atom, your electron that is spinning around your proton or whatever it is. but we feel things, and it feels pretty solid, right? You'd say that table's pretty solid. If you can get down to a quantum level, a molecular level, there is more space than there is matter in the wood of the table.
It's more of a gas.
There's more gas than there is solid. What's holding it together, right? The distance from your proton to your electron that's spinning around this, that creates the molecules which create the matter. The distance would be comparable to me holding a baseball, and I think it's like 100 yards away, there's another baseball spinning around me. That's how much space there is between the actual physical matter in. So what's holding it together? I think the Bible tells us in Colossians, the Lord is holding these components together, because without some force keeping things together, it would just fly apart. And one of these days, I think that's going to happen. Anyhow, stuff like this is intriguing to me. So when we get to chapter 38, we'll spend some time on that. I do have this reference, Isaiah 6, verses 1 to 3. Back to Job first. Verse 11, Job says, "The pillars of heaven tremble and are astonished at his rebuke." Made me think of Isaiah's vision of the Lord. If you remember, when he was called to be a prophet, he was shown a vision of the Lord at his throne. Isaiah 6, verses 1 to 3, he says, "In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above it stood seraphim. Each one had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one cried to the other and said, 'Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory.' And the posts of the door were shaken by the voice of him who cried out, and the house was filled with smoke." That sounds like what Job just said. The pillars of heaven tremble and are astonished at his rebuke, he says. Job knew this mighty energy displayed was God's power in action. And in the next verse, he says it's the same power in the storms that stir up the sea. Verse 12, he says, "He stirs up the sea with his power, and by his understanding he breaks up the storm. By his spirit he adorned the heavens. His hand pierced the fleeing serpent." This is another reference. We had this way back in chapter 3, a reference to an ancient serpent that God defeated. Isaiah 51:9, Psalm 89, verse 8 speak of a serpent associated with the sea that God defeated to demonstrate his great strength. That serpent is identified with the name Rahab, meaning proud one. And we know Satan, I've said before, Satan is often represented as a dragon or a serpent. So this could be another one of those serpent-like manifestations of Satan, the original proud one, the original Rahab, if you will. And again, there's a whole chapter that talks about this, which we'll get into when God shows up. Verse 14, "Indeed, these are the mere edges of his ways. How small a whisper we hear of him." Isn't that true? We try to fathom the greatness of God, the glory of God, God's power and God's majesty. And Job says these are just the mere edges of him. How small a whisper we hear of him. No matter how amazing or impressive a description Job can give us, Job knew it wouldn't even begin to fully describe God. And like I said, when God finally speaks later in the book, he's going to speak to Job about his ways. And those are the things that Job says, I can only touch the edges of. "Indeed, these are the mere edges of his ways. How small a whisper we hear of him, but the thunder of his power, who can understand?" I think Job understood a lot about God, but he understood enough to know that there was far more things he didn't know than what he did know. And that's how it wraps up chapter 26. I think Job was waiting for his friends to reply. This has been a back and forth for however many chapters. I picture he looked over at Zophar and he says, "Okay, you're next." But Zophar didn't say anything. In fact, all 3 of them were silent, whether it was out of frustration or they just grew tired of Job. Anyhow, I think Job maybe shrugged his shoulders and just kept going. He says, moreover, Job continued his discourse and said, as God lives, who has taken away my justice, and the Almighty who has made my soul bitter. Even though Job felt that God denied him justice, he knew that, or he believed that God was still just. Job might not have felt his justice, but he knew God was just in the end. As long as my breath is in me, and the breath of God in my nostrils, my lips will not speak wickedness, nor my tongue utter deceit. Far be it from me that I should say you are right. You wouldn't agree that his friends were right in their accusations against him. A lot of what the friends said were true, although misplaced and misapplied to Job's situation. But Job insisted he wouldn't speak wickedness, and he's not going to agree with their friends or with his friends that they were right in their accusations against him. Till I die, he says, I will not put away my integrity from me. My righteousness I hold fast and will not let it go. My heart shall not reproach me as long as I live. Basically, he's saying, I'll maintain my innocence as long as I live. Without wavering, my conscience is clear. Verse 7, may my enemy be like the wicked, and he who rises up against me like the unrighteous. Job's not playing around here. He's basically asking for the same punishment that his friends think he deserves to be put on them. He says, may my enemy be like the wicked, and he who rises up against me like the unrighteous. Basically saying, the punishment you think I deserve, he's saying to his friends, I want that on your heads now. For what is the hope of the hypocrite? Though he may gain much, if God takes away his life, will God hear his cry when trouble comes upon him? Will he delight himself in the Almighty? Will he always call on God? I mean, Job was accused of being a hypocrite by his friends, right? Clinging to some hidden sin, and not confessing and not repenting. So this put Job in kind of a difficult position. He's agreeing that the cry of the hypocrite, that God wouldn't hear, right? That's what he says. Will God hear his cry when trouble comes upon him? He agreed that God wouldn't hear the cry of the hypocrite. But here was Job saying, God's not hearing me, or I'm not hearing from God. So you can imagine his friends are going, now you're getting at Job, right? So it kind of put Job in kind of an awkward situation, I think, because Job seems to be, or is complaining that he's in this season of silence from God. So his argument is almost self-defeating here against his friends.
But those are definitely signs of righteousness for Job.
I would say. Yeah. He, like we've always said, it's not wrong to ask God questions. And for him to be in that season of silence, it doesn't mean there's punishment. It doesn't mean that's a judgment or God's withholding his favor for any reason, right? So these are things to discern and learn from these difficult chapters. I said before that Zophar doesn't speak anymore. There are many scholars that believe, starting at verse 11 of chapter 27, is actually Zophar's third discourse, which would kind of make sense. It kind of maintains the symmetry of what we've been seeing, right? 1, 2, 3, Job 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, and then apparently Zophar drops off the thing. So there's a lot of scholars that point out that verse 11 of chapter 27 to all of 28 may in fact be Zophar's third go at Job. All of our translations treat this as Job's reply, continued reply, and Zophar remains silent. I don't think it matters one way or the other, because a lot of what's being said there, whether Zophar is saying it or whether Job is saying it, the same lessons are to be learned. Job is frustrated with the lack of understanding from his friends. You could say Zophar is frustrated by Job's lack of understanding of their counsel. So whoever says what to whomever, I don't think is important. The lessons are there. The words are there. So we'll go on as though it were Job, and I assume it is Job. I have no reason not to, but there are other people for different reasons that suggest this is probably Zophar speaking. But Job's about to give his friends a quick rebuke. His friends knew certain principles about God, but they misapplied those principles to Job. So Job says, I will teach you about the hand of God. What is with the Almighty, I will not conceal. Surely all of you have seen it. Why then do you behave with complete nonsense? So Job is analyzing his friends, and they claim to know the ways of God, but he says, you're talking nonsense. It's kind of what God says when he shows up in chapter 38, by the way. You don't know what you're talking about. And then he goes on again in verse 13, speaks of the portion of the wicked man. This is the portion of a wicked man with God, and the heritage of oppressors received from the Almighty. So Job's about to argue as strongly as any of his friends had that ultimately judgment awaits the wicked. And the wicked will not ultimately be blessed in the end. He says, if his children are multiplied, it is for the sword, and his offspring shall not be satisfied with bread. Those who survive him shall be buried in death, and their widows shall not weep. Though he heaps up silver like dust, and piles up clothing like clay, he may pile it up, but the just will wear it, and the innocent will divide the silver. He builds his house like a moth, like a booth, which a watchman makes. The rich man will lie down, but not be gathered up. He opens his eyes, and he is no more. Terrors overtake him like a flood. A tempest steals him away in the night. The east wind carries him away, and he is gone. It sweeps him out of his place. It hurls against him and does not spare. He flees desperately from its power. Men shall clap their hands at him and shall hiss him out of his place. This is an important argument for Job to make to his friends. He agreed in general with the idea that the wicked is rewarded with judgment. That's what they can expect, right? God's judgment is going to be applied to the wicked. So he agreed with that. But this description of the wicked man, he says, if his children are multiplied, it is for the sword. Tears overtake him like a flood. The east wind carries him away. Men shall clap their hands at him. A lot of those apply to Job's own crisis. You read that, right? You recognize his children fell to the sword. It wasn't the sword, but they were killed. Tears overtake him like a flood. Job said he's terrified of God and what's happening. East wind carries him away. Well, we know a storm took his house. Men shall clap their hands at him. He even said that before as well. So Job is saying basically, I know my situation looks like judgment. He's not arguing that, but he's basically saying, I assure you it's not. Like, even though I recognize this is what happens to the wicked man, and this is what's happening to me, don't make that connection. Don't make that distinction that, because this is what the wicked suffer, just because I'm suffering the same doesn't mean I'm wicked. Chapter 28, Job continues this discourse on wisdom. He says in verse 1, surely there is a mine for silver and a place where gold is refined. Iron is taken from the earth, and copper is smelted from ore. I should say that this chapter almost sounds a little out of place. Some scholars find it to be incompatible with everything we've heard so far. It seems calm, and it seems thoughtful, and it seems too reflective to belong to Job. But all of these arguments and debates and accusations that are hurled at Job, you might say, why shouldn't he slip into a more reflective mood? Meditate on the source of wisdom to a point. But it does. It sounds a little bit different. He starts talking about how men will seek after treasure on the earth. He's going somewhere with this, but this is where he starts. He's basically painting a picture here. So again, verse 1, surely there is a mine for silver and a place where gold is refined. Iron is taken from the earth and copper is smelted from ore. Job's basically just describing the way men search for precious metals and stones and silver and gold and copper, those sort of things. Man puts an end to darkness and searches every recess for ore in the darkness and in the shadow of death. He breaks open a shaft away from people. In places forgotten by feet, they hang far away from men. They swing to and fro. This isn't really a metaphor about the situation in life. He's basically saying this is how people hunt for treasure. They break open a shaft. They shine light in dark places. They dig a trench or break open a shaft. They search every recess. They personally endanger themselves, right? Basically, they hang by a rope, swinging to and fro as they're lowered into this shaft. Like I said, we tend to apply everything Job says as something poetic and something metaphoric or a symbol of something else. He's basically saying this is how men search for treasure. As for the earth, from it comes bread, but underneath it is turned up as by fire. Its stones are the sources of sapphire, and it contains gold dust. So he's painting a picture of the earth now as well as being a treasure house of valuable items, right, and riches. If you're willing to work hard, if you're willing to search diligently for these riches, he says. On the surface, crops grow, they provide food. That's what it's saying. But in the depths, he says, but beneath the ground, it's been excavated and disturbed as if by fire, he says. Verse 7, that path no bird knows, nor has the falcon eye seen it. The proud lions have not trodden on it, nor has the fierce lion passed over it. Basically, is saying neither bird nor beast nor any creature has access to the remote places that men find themselves in their hunt for treasures. He puts his hand on the flint. He overturns the mountains at its roots. He cuts out channels in the rocks, and his eye sees every precious thing. He dams up the streams from trickling. What is hidden, he brings forth to light. Basically saying how hard men are, or how hard men are willing to work to gain the treasure and the wealth that's hidden in the earth. He's basically saying there's nothing man wouldn't do to seek out these treasures. And now he switches. This is his point in verse 12. But where can wisdom be found? He says this is how you're going to find literal treasures. But he says, where can wisdom be found? And where is the place of understanding? Man does not know its value, nor is it found in the land of the living. He's building on this point that he made in the previous verses, right? That men search hard and will even put themselves in danger for the sake of riches on the earth. But all that's easy, he says, in compared to wisdom, searching out wisdom. The deep says, it is not in me. The sea says, it is not with me. It cannot be purchased for gold, nor can silver be weighed for its price. It cannot be valued in the gold of Ophir, in precious onyx or sapphire. Neither gold nor crystal can equal it, nor can it be exchanged for jewelry or fine gold. No mention shall be made of coral or quartz. For the price of wisdom is above rubies. The topaz of Ethiopia cannot equal it, nor can it be valued in pure gold. Saying how rare wisdom is, even more valuable than all those things, right? More valuable than anything else to man. It can't be purchased for gold. It's worth far more than all these precious metals and stones. And he says, even if you could find it, he says you couldn't buy it. That's his logic. Verse 20, from where then does wisdom come? And where is the place of understanding? It is hidden from the eyes of all living and concealed from the birds of the air. Destruction and death say, we have heard a report about it with our ears. God understands its ways, and he knows its place. So Job just answered his question, right? God knows where wisdom is and where its source comes from. For he looks to the ends of the earth and sees under the whole heavens to establish a weight for the wind and apportion the waters by measure. When he made a law for the rain and a path for the thunderbolt, then he saw wisdom and declared it. So God's demonstrating his own wisdom and power in the design and creation of the universe, the natural world. He prepared it. Indeed, he searched it out. And to man he said, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. And to depart from evil is understanding. Does that sound familiar to you? The fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. The psalmist understood that. Psalm 111 says, for the fear of the Lord is the beginning of the wisdom. Repeated as well in Proverbs 9, Proverbs 13. So Job concludes this great speech by this basic truth, right? That if wisdom comes from God's revelation, then it's only found by being in a right relationship with God. Chapter 29. So Job now is remembering back to better days. Verse 1, Job further continued his discourse and said, oh, that I were as in months past, as in the days when God watched over me, when his lamp shone upon my head, and when by his light I walked through darkness. Obviously, Job was longing for the days before he lost his children and his health and his wealth. He longed for the days, especially, I think, when he sensed God's closeness. Through all of this, that seemed to be his bigger concern, right? But there was a time when he felt that God was watching over him, and those days seemingly are gone now. Just as I was in the days of my prime, when the friendly counsel of God was over my tent, when the Almighty was yet with me. So he's remembering again the days when God was for him rather than against him. And it's one thing to be near to God, but it's entirely another thing to be treated as one of God's familiar friends. There was a song years ago, I'm a Friend of God. Remember that? We used to sing that in our church a lot. But it's true. There's a lot of passages about that where God refers to certain people as his friend. Like that's something to say, to be a friend of God. When the friendly counsel of God was over my tent, he said, when the Almighty was yet with me, when my children were around me, when my steps were bathed in cream and the rock poured out rivers of oil for me. He's laying it on a little bit thick there. But it's basically painting this picture, right, of his former happy life. He genuinely felt that he was in fellowship with God before, and the blessing of that flowed into every area of his life. Verse 7, when I went out to the gate by the city, when I took my seat by the open square. That's interesting. We remember that we don't know where Uz was. We don't know much about this city, but it had a gate. It had a square, a public square. So any city with a gate and a wall and a public square would have to be some sort of major urban center.
Because that's where they conducted all their business.
Right. And the fact that Job sat at the gate, that goes back to, looks ahead to, from Job's position, Lot, right? Lot sat at the gate of Sodom and Gomorrah. That doesn't mean he just had a seat where he watched the world go by. He held a position, basically. He was like a counselor for the city, something to that effect. He conducted the business of the city, heard matters, and that sort of thing. No doubt, Job probably was something similar in Uz, by the sounds of it. I took my seat, he said, in the open square. The young men saw me and hid, and the aged arose and stood. The princes refrained from talking and put their hands to their mouth. The voice of nobles was hushed, and their tongue stuck to the roof of their mouth. I feel like me right now. Kind of. Basically, Job is remembering how he was greatly respected in the community. Right?
Want to drink water?
I would love a bottle of water. That would be great. Thank you, Bill. But obviously, I would say he held a position of leadership here in the community, right? It says he was feared by young men and he was honored by the aged. Even princes and nobles stopped to listen to him speak. Verse 11, when the ear heard, then it blessed me. And when the eye saw, then it approved me. So not only, thanks, Bill, appreciate that. So not only did Job gain the attention of the people of the city, but they liked him, right?
Yes.
The ear heard and it blessed me, and the eye saw and it approved of me. So they liked what they heard and saw from Job. Why? He says, because I delivered the poor who cried out, the fatherless and the one who had no helper. The blessing of a perishing man came upon me, and I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy. I put on righteousness, and it clothed me. My justice was like a robe and a turban. I was eyes to the blind, and I was feet to the lame. I was a father to the poor. Isn't it interesting? What chapter are we in? 29. That Job has never pointed out any of these good deeds in his defense against his friends until now. He made his defense squarely upon his faith, not upon his works, not upon his deeds. He relied on his faith to be his defense. So it's interesting that only now he's starting to point out this. I think that shows some degree of restraint on his part, right?
Or
He
do you
waited so
think-
long to provide this hard evidence, let's say.
I was just thinking maybe he thought his faith would be enough.
Sure,
Yeah.
exactly, yeah. He continues, he said, I searched out the case that I did not know. I broke the fangs of the wicked and plucked the victim from its teeth. So he was full of good and noble works, basically. He helped the poor and the disadvantaged, he says. Verse 18, then I said, I shall die in my nest and multiply my days as the sand. My root is spread out to the waters, and the dew lies all night on my branch. My glory is fresh within me, and my bow is yet renewed in my hand. In his former life, I would say Job felt that he would die happy, die secure after a good long life, right? That's basically what it's saying there. And I think that made his present crisis all that more unbearable, right? Like he had a vision of how his life was going to play out, and everything is just upside down now.
Yeah.
Men listened to me and waited and kept silence for my counsel. After my words, they did not speak again, and my speech settled on them as dew. He was respected and honored for his wise words. They waited for me as for the rain, and they opened their mouth wide as for the spring rain. If I mocked at them, they did not believe it. Basically saying it would have been so out of character for Job that if in fact he'd mocked somebody, their eyes and their ears wouldn't believe it, because it wouldn't be of his character. And the light of my countenance, he says, they did not cast down. I chose the way for them and sat as chief, so I dwelt as a king in the army, as one who comforts mourners. Quite a contrast between the Job we know now and the former Job from before, right? Often I read that chapter and it's like, yeah, I could see why Satan made his claim against God or against Job to God, right? If you had known Job before all that we've seen in his previous life, how good things were, how respected he was in his wealth and whatever, you would think, yeah, Satan's probably right. He is only being faithful and honoring God because of the position he has, because of the favor it seems God is giving him, right? But that's a good example how a wealthy and a powerful man should live their life. with care and concern for others. But yeah, you read that. It's like, okay, so there's a picture of what Job was prior to his crisis. Job continues now, and now he says, "That's who I was." Now he says, "This is who I am now. But now they mock at me, men younger than I, whose fathers I disdain to put with the dogs of my flock. Indeed, what profit is the strength of their hands to me?" Basically, the sons of the men who Job wouldn't even put with his dogs, basically, are now his critics, and now the ones that are mocking him. Their vigor has perished. They are gaunt from want and famine, fleeing late into the wilderness, desolate and waste. Who pluck mallow by the bushes and broom tree roots for their food. They were driven out from among men. They shouted at them as a thief. They had to live in the clefts of the valleys, in caves of the earth and in the rocks. Among the bushes they brayed. Under the nettles they nestled. They were sons of fools, yes, sons of vile men. They were scourged from the land. So basically, he's bringing out these worthless men he talked about being his loudest critics, right? How unjust that must have felt for Job. So Job was pretty low in the eyes of these men. Verse 9, and now I am their taunting song. Yes, I am their byword. They abhor me. They keep far from me. They do not hesitate to spit in my face. Because he has loosened my bowstring and afflicted me, they have cast off restraint before me. At my right hand the rabble arises. They push away my feet. They raise against me their ways of destruction. They break up my path. They promote my calamity. They have no helper. They come as broad breakers, and under the ruinous storm they roll along. That's interesting. Remember that. Terrors are turned upon me. They pursue my honor as the wind, and my prosperity has passed like a cloud. So he's agonizing over his present state. He's remembering that he was once respected and honored, but all that's vanished now. Verse 14, he says, they come as broad breakers. Under the ruinous storm they roll along. That's, I read about siege warfare, how the Romans would lay siege to a city, basically encamp around it, cut off the city altogether. Nobody could come in or out. And they would basically starve within the city to the point that now they can just move in and there's not going to be any advancement. Job's likening himself to a city basically under siege. He says, a wide gaping breach in my wall, these instruments of siege warfare rolling through the rubble. So these broad breakers, think of like a battering ram. That's basically what that implies there, blowing through the city's defenses, right? And the stones come crashing down. So the tranquility that Job had enjoyed for so long has vanished now in the cloud of debris and dust, basically, as the city walls are being torn down around him. And now my soul is poured out because of my plight. Verse 16, the days of affliction take hold of me. My bones are pierced in me at night, and my gnawing pains take no rest. That's interesting. He talks about these persistent gnawing pains, but that was his secondary complaint right there. First, he said, now my soul is poured out. So Job's first and primary crisis was a crisis of the soul. The secondary complaint was his pain and these persistent agony. Verse 18, by great force my garment is disfigured. It binds me about as the collar of my coat. It has cast me into the mire, and I have become like dust and ashes. I read that and I asked Vanessa, I said, that sounds weird, right? Like, binds about me as the collar of my coat and cast me into the mire. Then I read the New Living Translation, which I often do because it helps render that a little bit differently. The NLT says, in his great power, God clutches at my clothing He grabs me by the collar of my coat and throws me into the mud. That's a pretty graphic description, right, of Job's agony and suffering. And this has to be the worst aspect that Job's going through. In verse 20 he says, I cry out to you, but you do not answer me. I cry out to you, you do not answer me. I stand up and you regard me, but you have become cruel to me. Understandably, Job felt that God was against him. Job felt that God wanted to destroy him and ultimately would destroy him. So that has to be terrible for Job, right? The sense that God has forsaken him.
Yeah.
A minute ago, he said, I was like a friend to God. And now this is how he's treating me. I cry out to you, but you do not answer me. I stand up and you regard me, but you have become cruel to me. With the strength of your hand, you oppose me. You lift me up to the wind and cause me to ride on it. You spoil my success. For I know that you will bring me to death and to the house appointed for all living. So Job felt it was only a matter of time, like his death was imminent. In some respects, that would bring him relief, he says, but only after his body was ruined and only after God's appointed punishment was finished with him. Verse 24, surely he would not stretch out his hand against a heap of ruins if they cried out when he destroyed it. Basically saying, God, you're more merciful than this, right? You wouldn't afflict a heap of ruins the way if it cried out to you the way I cry out to you. Basically, he says you wouldn't even afflict a heap of ruins like this. So no wonder why, or Job wondered why God didn't respond to his cries, right? Job assumed that God's silence was God's displeasure. And Job interprets God's silence, right? Or misinterprets God's silence that way. And that's a good reminder for us. Like I said before, don't mistake God's silence as a lack of concern or indifference to our situation. Quite the opposite. Verse 25, have I not wept for him who is in trouble? Has not my soul grieved for the poor? Job's wondering, God, why don't you treat me with the same kindness that I showed others, right? But when I looked for good, evil came to me. And when I waited for light, then came darkness. My heart is in turmoil and cannot rest. Days of affliction confront me. I go about mourning, but not in the sun. I stand up in the assembly and cry out for help. I am a brother of jackals, a companion of ostriches. My skin grows black and falls from me. My bones burn with fever. My harp is turned to mourning, and my flute to the voice of those who weep. I don't know how else you could paint Job's torment. Pretty sad compared to his former life that we read in the previous chapter. And finally, now chapter 31. Job ends this whole lengthy chapter swearing his innocence. We're told in chapters 1 and 2, if you remember, that Job was blameless and upright. Like, that was God's opinion of Job. And this next chapter is kind of going to show us what that godly life should look like. So this was Job's final answer to his friends. Verse 1, he says, I have made a covenant with my eyes. Why then should I look upon a young woman? It's interesting. Job's going to talk a lot about the conduct of a righteous man, the conduct of a wicked man. I think it's significant that Job started here, that he guarded his eyes from lustful looks, right? So man's ability to not even look upon sin, I think, is an important indicator of our godliness or our righteousness and our blamelessness. Job says, I have made a covenant with my eyes. Basically a promise, a covenant, a commitment, a vow that he wouldn't look upon a woman in a sinful way. But really, he says he made a covenant with my eyes. He made a covenant with God against his eyes, really is what it was. but basically is saying, I refuse to dwell upon any of those lustful feelings, right? Not that he probably wouldn't experience lust or temptation or something in the future, but basically, I'm not going to dwell on those things. Which I think is interesting in that culture. I mean, we look at that today and we have our own picture of what that looks like. But in that culture, a man with such wealth and power, it wouldn't be unheard of for a man to take a young woman as his wife or as a concubine, because of that, right? Like, I mean, that was just a cultural thing then. So the fact that Job restrained himself in the way that others probably wouldn't have in that day and in that culture, I think is significant. Verse 2, for what is the allotment of God from above and the inheritance of the Almighty from on high? So Job is considering what the allotment from God was. What is that? Basically, any woman that he might be enticed to look upon, he understood that was not the allotment of God for him. She didn't belong to Job in any way. So only his own wife is the allotment of God from above. Only his own wife is the inheritance of the Almighty. Is it not destruction for the wicked and disasters for the workers of iniquity? Does he not see my ways and count all my steps? Romans 12, verses 1 and 2. Paul says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is good and acceptable and perfect will of God. He's basically saying, or Job is basically saying the same thing Paul was saying there, right? I made a commitment that I'm not going to fall into this temptation. Made that commitment before the temptation was there, basically. It already resigned in his heart that he would not be guilty of lust the way he said. Verse 8, or verse 5 rather. So he's not guilty of lust. And he says, now I'm not guilty of any falsehoods either. As we read through this, something that kind of struck me as well. There's almost a connection with the things that Job talks about with Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Job touches on a lot of spiritual matters that Jesus covers in Matthew 5 and 6 and 7, right? There's a relationship between lust and adultery. Jesus talks about loving one's neighbor as yourself. Job talks about that in the next few verses. He talks about almsgiving and social justice, right? The love of money and other idolatry. So these are all similar things that Jesus spoke about in Matthew. Almost like chapter 31 is Job's Sermon on the Mount. But he says in verse 5, if I have walked with falsehood, or if my foot has hastened to deceit, then let me be weighed on honest scales, that God may know my integrity. So Job says, I've lived an essentially truthful life. And he wasn't afraid to be examined to have his life weighed on a set of honest scales. Brave of Job. I don't know that I would want that. I mean, no matter how well I conduct myself, I wouldn't want to be weighed on God's scales, honestly. We all know we all fall short. We are none righteous, right? But Job is pretty confident that he's been truthful in his life. If my step is turned from the way, or if my heart walked after my eyes, or if any spot adheres to my hands, then let me sow and another eat. Let my harvest be rooted out. So he's pretty confident to the point that he's even willing to call a curse upon himself, right? He says, if I'm not an honest man, he says, let me sow and another one eat my harvest, right? Let my harvest be rooted out. So that's impressive, Job's confidence. And it's like he's saying to his friends, would I claim to be something I'm not? Would I dare to speak God this way unless I was sure about the facts that I'm presenting? verse 9, he talks about is not an adulterer either. If my heart has been enticed by a woman, or if I have lurked at my neighbor's door, then let my wife grind for another, and let others bow down over her. So he was faithful in his marriage, he says. And if he had been unfaithful, then he deserved to have his wife taken from him and given to another. For that would be wickedness, he says, if he were enticed by another woman, basically. That would be wickedness. Yes, it would be iniquity deserving of judgment, for that would be a fire that consumes to destruction and would root out all my increase. Job understood allowing his heart to be enticed by another woman would bring destruction on his life. Many men who allow their hearts to be taken by another can see their increase rooted out. We know people who have been stung by divorce and adultery, right? And their lives are ruined over it, right? You think about the alimony payments and the child support and the dividing of property and stuff like that. Certainly is not wrong. That's a fire that consumes to destruction and roots out all my increase, he says. If I have despised the cause of my male or female servants, when they complained against me, what then shall I do when God rises up? When he punishes, how shall I answer him? So again, it's defending his own righteousness, noting that he treated his servants well. And he understood that he would have to answer to God as well for his actions, the way he treated his own servants, right? Paul gave the same idea in Ephesians 6, speaking of masters' treatment of their servants. He says, "New masters, do the same things to them, giving up threatening, knowing that your own master is in heaven, that there's no partiality with him." So Job understood that God would avenge any ill treatment of his servants. So in verse 15, he says, "Did not he who made me in the womb make them? Did not the same one fashion us in the womb?" Basically, he's recognizing their basic humanity, right? He treated his servants well. He says, slave or not, he says, we're all human. We're all God's creation, basically. Now, Job also insisted he's been good to the poor and the helpless. Verse 16, if I have kept the poor from their desire, or caused the eyes of the widow to fail, or eaten my morsel by myself, so that the fatherless would not eat of it. But from my youth I reared him as a father, and from my mother's womb I guided the widow. If I have seen anyone perish for lack of clothing, or any poor man without covering, if his heart has not blessed me, and if he has not warmed with the fleece of my sheep, if I have raised my hand against the fatherless, when I saw I had help at the gate, then let my arm fall from the shoulder, and let my arm be torn from its socket. Pretty graphic. Again, like Job's calling for a curse. He's pretty confident, right? That if it were true that he didn't help the helpless at all, or didn't help the poor and didn't help the helpless, then he would deserve a punishment. And pretty brutal punishment. He said, let my arm fall from its shoulder. Let my arm be torn from its socket. For destruction from God is a terror to me, and because of his magnificence, I cannot endure. He goes on saying, I haven't been greedy, and I don't seek after false gods. Verse 24, he says, if I have made gold my hope, or I said to find gold, you are my confidence. If I have rejoiced because my wealth was great, and because my hand had gained much, or if I have observed the sun when it shines, or the moon moving in brightness, so that my heart has been secretly enticed and my mouth has kissed my hand. He's basically saying, I haven't made riches my hope, right? I haven't put gold as my confidence, right? I'm not rejoicing over my wealth. He says, then he says, if I observe the sun when it shines, or the moon in its brightness, and my heart has been secretly enticed, my mouth has kissed my hand. What's all that about? So basically, he's not just saying I have admiration for creation, right? It's not that I just admire the sun or the moon. Basically saying I haven't engaged in the practice of sun worship or that sort of thing, right? when idols were out of the reach of the idolaters, they'd often kiss their hands, almost like blowing a kiss was the idea. And that's kind of what Job is saying here. And my mouth has kissed my hand. Basically, I wasn't throwing kisses at these idols. He's been upright in his in this. This also would be an iniquity deserving of judgment, he says, for I would have denied God who is above. And again, this is interesting, right? We would say, yeah, of course. But it's certain that the book of Job was written long before any other scripture, right? We talked about that many times. But he knew even then that idolatry was wrong, right? This is before the laws of Moses. This is before God's commandments and warnings about idolatry. He knew there was a true and living God, even before the accounts of Moses. And it would have been wrong to deny God or to worship any other God before the living God. It's all these little things that kind of catch my eye and intrigue me, right? And generally, he says, I was without blame. He says, if I have rejoiced at the destruction of him who hated me, or lifted myself up when evil found him, indeed, I have not allowed my mouth to sin by asking for a curse on his soul. Basically, he's saying, I've never been happy to see my enemy suffer, right? I didn't want my enemies to be destroyed. Which begs the question, who else takes no pleasure in seeing the wickedness or the wicked destroyed? God does, right? Ezekiel 33, verse 11, the Lord says, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but that the wicked turn from his way and live. So turn from your evil ways, for why should you die? So even Job wouldn't curse his enemies. And I think that's the mark of somebody after God's heart. When God says, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked, well, Job says, I didn't either. I never wanted to see my enemies destroyed. Verse 31, if the men of my tent have not said, who is there and who has not been satisfied with his meat? But no sojourner had to lodge in the street, for I have opened my doors to the traveler. If I have covered my transgressions as Adam by hiding my iniquity in my bosom, he's basically saying that I wasn't covering my sins the same way Adam did, blaming Eve for his sin, because I feared the great multitude and dreaded the contempt of families, so that I kept silence and did not go out of the door. Basically saying, I'm not like some men who would just hide my sin out of fear, right? Avoid public humiliation or contempt. He says, I haven't been hiding anything. Verse 35, oh, that I had one to hear me. Here is my mark. I'm sure Job could have gone on and on about his righteousness and his godliness and defending himself. But basically, he breaks it off here with this line of reasoning. And this is his final dramatic appeal before God. He says, here is my mark. The statement literally means, here is my ta, or tav, which is the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And it would be like us saying, here's my X, right? It's my mark, it's my signature. The same way we have on our signature line an X, right? That's basically what Job is saying. Here is my signature. Basically, I'm so confident in my innocence. He says, I'm willing to sign my defense papers. Like this is my statement of defense now, and I'll sign it with my name. And now he challenges God basically for the corresponding written charges against him, right? He says, here's my defense. Now, show me what my charges are. He says, oh, that the Almighty would answer me, that my prosecutor had written a book. So Job was confident that he needed an answer from God. He couldn't make sense of his situation, and he called God out basically to answer for what he's done to Job. He says that my prosecutor had written a book. Now, Job doesn't know what we know. Job's real accuser wasn't God at all, but it was Satan.
Yes.
Job doesn't know this. He says, surely I would carry it on my shoulder and bind it on me like a crown. I would declare to him the number of my steps, and like a prince, I would approach him. Now, this is one of those things that Job is going to later repent of. Job wanted God's accusations written out against him, and he would refute it the same way he refuted his friends, is what he's saying. That's a little out of bounds. These aren't his friends he's talking about now, right? And he's so confident of himself, he says, I'll approach him like a prince would approach. So Job was confident in what he did know. He knew he was blameless. He knew he was an upright man. He knew he didn't bring this catastrophe upon himself, right? There wasn't some hidden sin that caused all this to happen.
Right.
The problem was he was too confident in the things he didn't know, or things he didn't see, right? He didn't know what was happening in the spiritual realm. We know, as the reader, like we've seen these things that were unknown to Job in his story. But Job thought he had it all figured out, and his friends did too, but none of them did really what was really happening. Verse 38, if my land cries out against me, and its furrows weep together, if I have eaten its fruit without money, or caused its owners to lose their lives, then let thistles grow instead of wheat, and weeds instead of barley. Again, it's calling for a curse upon himself if it can be demonstrated in any way that he's an obvious sinner and deserving of this judgment or discipline from God. So he calls one more curse on him, on his own land and his own property. And then chapter 31 finishes with this. He says, the words of Job are ended. It isn't that we don't hear from Job anymore.
No.
We're going to hear from him again. But basically, he's done arguing his case. He's said his piece to his friends. He's made his defense to God. So Job's finished. The words of Job are ended.
The defense rests.
The defense rests. Now,
Does he ever find out that it was the devil that
there's nothing in Job that would suggest that he was ever shown that. I would say yes, ultimately, when he was in heaven, all things would have been revealed to Job. But there's nowhere in the book of Job that would suggest that he was aware of what had actually happened to him. And that's one of the big things about the book of Job, right? We want to try and figure out some of these questions that Job has, right? Why do the innocent suffer? Why are the wicked prospering, and that sort of thing? If those are the questions that we need to ask out of Job, then they don't get answered. I don't think that's the point of the book of Job. If it were, like I say, those questions that Job raises aren't really answered. And, well, I'm already thinking about the end of the book and how I would end this Bible study when we're done. We're done with the book. But basically, I think the lessons of Job aren't anything that anybody can teach any of us. I don't know about you. When you read through these comments, we read through Job's questions, and we read through the friends' accusations and their take on things and their opinion of how God behaves and acts. There are things in there that I can relate to, and I suspect everybody can read something in there. It's like, yeah, I know. I asked those questions myself, right? So I think Job is a very personal book, and the applications made in it are for ourselves. There are lessons that we're all going to learn, but they're not necessarily the same lessons that we're all going to glean out of it. I think one of the big takeaways from the book is that we have to maintain a heavenly perspective on our lives and our situation, right? We live in this physical world, but there's a dimension around us that we have no idea what's happening. And there are purposes God has for our lives that are beyond our knowing. Even if we did know, even if we did have an insight into what was happening, I would say more often than not, we probably wouldn't like it, right? Like God had a purpose for Job. Had he known, would he have accepted it? I don't know. Maybe. Who's to say?
Yeah.
But it was Job's submission in the end that was the big takeaway for him, right? Basically said, I know my Redeemer lives. And one day I'll be vindicated. One day I'll stand before him. And for him, I guess that was the big moment.
Mhm.
And like I said, I think for all of us, we all have a big moment when we read through Job and we consider and contemplate the big purposes and the big things that happen around us. Like I say, it's maintaining that perspective that, we're a speck in God's cosmos. And you can feel pretty insignificant sometimes when you start really looking at the big picture. But that's one of the points, anyhow. I think that we'll get out of Job. But for now, Job is done. He's done arguing his case. G. Campbell Morgan. I thought this was good. This is from his 1920 commentary. He says, at this point, then, we have reached the end of Job's expressions of pain. The end is silence. That's God's opportunity for speech. He often waits until we have said everything, and then, in the silence prepared for such speech, he answers. I like that.
Yeah.
So Job's been defending himself vigorously through these 30 chapters now. But like I said, like ourselves, Job has a small understanding of Satan's attack and sin's hold on his life and on our lives, right? We don't really know the depravity of our own hearts. I don't think any of us really understand how depraved our lives are and how depraved our hearts are. Jeremiah 17, verse 9 is a key verse. He says, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? Just think about that. I mean, that's quite a statement, right? That the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Our Bibles say desperately wicked. The actual word there that's used, the literal word is incurably. Our hearts are incurably wicked. That's why over and over in the Bible, I think it says God gives us a new heart because we are incurable. Our hearts are incurable. And that's what it means, right? When we say we're born again, basically God gives us a new heart. So in my opinion, now we've gone through the difficult part of the book, these debates and these dialogues. They're hard. They're dark. And they're tedious. So happy to be through them. And I don't think we've abused them too badly by going through them as quickly as we have. But next time, read chapters 32 to 37. We're going to be introduced to a new guy that's not been mentioned yet, Elihu. We talk about Job's three friends. Well, there's a fourth guy that's obviously been sitting in the shadows and is about to speak. So he's got, of the three, he's got the longest speech. Elihu, 32 to 37. And then we'll get to the fun part of the book that I think is fun anyhow. Chapters 38 to 41, when God himself speaks. That's going to be fun. I always feel like I have to be almost apologize for going through the chapters as quickly as we have, but I think we've done enough to get the flavor of what's being said and enough to see that even in the poetry and the eloquence and stuff like that, there are issues that come out of their speeches. But yeah, I'm happy to be through that part. So we'll look at Elihu starting next week. Any thoughts, any questions about any of these debates or dialogues? Like I say, it's tedious, and that was a concern I had when we started Job. I didn't want to be bogged down for weeks and weeks and weeks going through this. And I guess I took it on as a bit of a challenge because I thought if I can get through Job, the rest of it should be easy. And you guys keep coming back, so.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's just pray before we go and then we'll call it a night. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word. And we thank you for this book of Job. And we pray, Father, that you would open Lord, you would open our eyes and our hearts to your word. We pray that the lessons that we learn in the book of Job, Lord, would not be lost on us. That there are things, Lord, that are in here for our teaching and for our understanding and for our help and for our growth, Lord. So, Lord, we pray that each one of us here, we pray that your purposes will be accomplished in our lives, that the lessons we learn wouldn't be wasted and would provide for our growth, Lord. So, Lord, we pray you would just continue to help us to grow in the grace and the knowledge of your Son, Jesus Christ. And we commit ourselves tonight, Lord, to you. We commit ourselves and our walk, Lord, to you. And Lord, I pray as we leave here this evening, you would go with us, keep us safe, keep us healthy, give us traveling mercies as we go home. Be with us this week, Lord, and just help us to be sensitive to those around us, Lord. If there's any comfort, any support, any help, Lord, that we can offer people, you would soften our hearts and encourage our spirit, Lord, to act on that. So I just pray a blessing on those that come again tonight, and be with us again this week, and prepare our hearts for next week, I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Do you think that God used this suffering for Job? And through it, I think Job found a whole new perspective of God. The same as when we go through suffering,
I suspect.
we find a new meaning, a new perspective,
Yeah.
a new understanding, of God.
Yeah.
Appreciation.
I have no doubt.
Yeah.
I have no doubt.
Yeah.
God works all things together for good, right?
Mm-hmm.
For those that love him, those that are called according to his purpose. God had a purpose for Job. So he's going to work this situation for his good, right? So yeah, kind of like what I said last week, right? It's often in our darkest moments that we see the greatest truths of God. And that's no doubt the same thing. Job probably at the end of all this felt closer to God than he had before. God blesses him doubly from the life he had before. I don't think it's a reward as much as it is just God's favor on Job. So yeah, I think certainly is probably through all of this gets a new revelation of God, new understanding, a new deeper appreciation for the things of the Lord. Yeah. All right, guys. Appreciate you.
Thank you.